Okay, people. So today I am joined by we've got Jane Gills and Ali Catterall. Right? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Well, you got Catterall correctly, but I'm Jane Giles,
Jane
not Giles. Yeah.
Giles. Damn it.
It's funny. It's how the French pronounce it weirdly. The Jean Gilles whenever they interview it. Jean Gilles, which always.
Whereas Ali usually gets, are you Ali Catterall or Ali Catterall?
Yeah. But well done on my one. That's the harder one. Let's do this.
Oh man. Oh dear. Well, Ali and Jane are the writers and directors of Scala, or The Incredible Strange Rise and Fall of the World's Wildest Cinema, and how it influenced a mixed up generation of weirdos and misfits.
We like to pronounce that like Run DMC when we're on stage. We're like, or The Incredible. Go on, Jane.
Straight.
Rise and Fall. Oh, we've screwed it up already.
Sorry, we have screwed it up already. We can't.
Run DMC never did this.
Was a little bit smoother, maybe. Now, this was a fascinating documentary. There's, I've been to the Scala, but not in its first iteration as a cinema.
Yeah.
So learning that history was, incredible. Like, now I know this is based on your book from 2018, Jane. But what was the interest to telling this story, in the book form and then going to make the documentary?
Yeah, no, good point. So when the Scala Cinema closed in 1993, I had kept a lot of artifacts from the office because we really thought we were going to try and reopen the cinema somewhere. So I kept all of the programs, and there were 178 of them, the monthly programs from 1978 to 93. They're the ones that you see in the film, the big kind of like fold out sheets that are really amazing graphic design. And then one of the things that people, remember most strongly about Scala was the programs. So we've kept those. We've kept like the box office returns book and the distribution, like catalogs and all of that sort of stuff. And I had a very strong urge to write the book, and based on programs as a sort of cultural history of London during those years, which pretty much the Thatcher years, the period of the Scala is bookended by Thatcher's election to the government and then her being booted out of the party, although the Conservatives continued. So the book got written. Ali is the editor of the book, and as the book was kind of hitting the newsstand, not the newsstands, but the bookshelves of the crowdfunders who supported it, and hitting the bookshelves with a great big thud, because the book is enormous. It's about sort of this big. It weighs 5 kilos. It's an enormous, overlarge, a great big thing. We realized that there was something missing from the book, and that was the voice of the audience. Like, the book is very much from the point of view of the management, and it's quite sort of factually historical. Whereas I knew by that point there was lots of archive footage that existed, shot during those years at Scala, as well as all the fabulous movie clips. And ultimately, the subject matter, that of cinema, it was irresistible to want to make a film of the Scala story, but doing something a bit different from the point of view of the audience.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it does make sense, right, to make it a documentary, add that actual visual kind of, piece to it all. Now, you both kind of worked in film. but this was your directorial debut. So thinking, okay, this needs to be something. This needs to be a visual story. But why then? Because I think we can do that. What was the thing that like had the confidence that you could turn this into, you know, your vision?
Ali?
Well, to be honest, we didn't have the confidence initially. We grew up a huge lot, and to be honest, even before it was a documentary, because we'd hooked up with Channel X, who make things like The Detectorists and Vic and Bob, Shooting Stars, Wurzel Gummidge, Home, sort of comedy dramas, really. The first kind of feeling was that we should do a kind of sitcom, a kind of real surreal, kind of like The Young Ones meet cinema, kind of very anarchic sitcom, based on the Scala. And for whatever reason, we couldn't make that work, probably because we're not sitcom writers, and it's a hugely particular kind of discipline that most comedy writers even shy away from. It's a real hard thing to do. So having sort of crashed and burned, and I still think there were some good things in it, actually, which I think we'd quite like to resurrect at some point in the future. But having mostly kind of not succeeded at making a successful kind of sitcom pilot, we just went, okay, let's go straight back to the drawing board and actually do a documentary, which at this point is probably, you know, over and above the right thing to do. So we drew up a unicorn list of directors who just were impossibly busy. I mean, no one was going to go, yeah, we'll direct it for you. But, you know, when you're kind of slightly inexperienced, you think, we'll just ask them, you know. And sometimes that can happen. Sometimes if you have the kind of front to ask people, they go, yeah, all right. And that was our experience, certainly in getting the interviews. But in getting the directors, it was like, this is not going to happen. So I well remember one day sitting around an office or a club, and Channel X going, do you know what? Okay, guys, look, you're not going to get a director. So we think we know the best person to direct. This is probably not verbatim, but it was around about that kind of thing. And like, I always liken this to kind of Donald Sutherland at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, pointing at Jane like this, you direct it. I think I'll let Jane take over for what her reaction was.
I did go to film school, but I never wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be, what I was, which was a film programmer, an exhibitor, and a distributor. Most of my career has been about film distribution. So I was always working with the finished product, not actually generating something. So I didn't really want to direct the film, but the producers, also at that point, including, as well as Channel X, Andy Stark, who fantastic producer who works with Ben Wheatley, Peter Strickland, Prano Bailey Bond, and
a legend.
Numerous others. Very experienced, very lovely guy, and because they were all sort of pointing at me and cornered me like an animal, what they actually said was, "It's not rocket science. You can do it. You just by experienced people, and you don't pretend to know more than you do." So that's exactly what happened. We worked sort of piecemeal on the film. More or less the first year was spent developing it and raising the finance, most of which, 2/3 of which came from the BFI Doc Society, and 1/3 of which came from a crowdfunder supported by over 300 people. So that was year one. Year two was COVID. And when COVID finished, the Scala as a music venue was still locked down, but they allowed us access to go and film our interviews. So by then, Ali and I had researched who we wanted to speak to, having decided that we wanted to speak to a lot of people, not just a small group. And we wanted those people to be relatable, and to also have a name, so that if the audience for our film wanted to look them up, they could Google those people, or search engine those people, and find them quite easily. So we went with people who were young in the audience at the time at Scala, but went on to be musicians, writers, artists, activists, actors, and so forth. So that was our sort of methodology for finding the interviewees. So that was like, I think, year 2. Year 3, we spent editing for a year and a half. Everybody was working on other jobs at the same time. And then the 4th year was spent releasing the film. And here we are. That brings us up to date.
Right, right. So when that finger turned on you, how then did Ali come into the mix?
Oh, good point. So I'll just to briefly say, I said, okay, I'll do it if he does it with me. Because Ali and I had worked together on the book, and I knew I couldn't do it on my own because I really like to talk things through. And with filmmaking, there's a lot of decisions to make. And like, I guess if you're a single person, you just doing it on your own, you just sort of do that process in your head. But Ali and I figured it out together.
I mean, we've sort of been creatively married since about 2016, one way or the other, working on the Scala. It's been quite an interesting sort of working relationship, particularly as regards the Scala. You're dealing with a dynamic of someone who pretty much is the Scala, Madam Scala, who was the program manager of the Scala, and me, who was a punter. So I think it's a really good dynamic to have those two sides kind of reflected. Although, as I say, the film is from the audience's perspective, not the manager's perspective.
Yeah. I mean, did you remember each other from those days? Was there any interaction from those, early Scala days?
No, not at all. I mean, sorry, Jane. So, no, I mean, I was 16 and Jane was not 16, and I was a punter and Jane was like staff. So no, but I did actually, the first time I did meet quote unquote Jane was when I was writing a book about British cult movies in 1999, called Your Face Here: British Cult Movies Since the 60s. And because it had a chapter on Clockwork Orange in it, and obviously the Scala's association has a significant association with the Clockwork Orange, it was recommended. I can't remember who. Jane will probably kill him now, but someone said, "Go and talk to Jane about A Clockwork Orange." So I rang Jane, and given that it was probably like 6 years after the rawness of that court case, she was naturally, completely understandably not interested in talking about A Clockwork Orange. But that was the first time I spoke to her. Yeah, but it wasn't probably for another kind of like 15, 16 years that we properly sort of met up and started working together.
Right, right. And how do you, because, like, look, you've made this film together, right? You've worked together for so long now, but how did that relationship build, right? What were those kind of initial kind of workings? How did you establish, the voice that you have together?
Well, it's interesting. We sort of worked in shifts. I think, first of all, we sort of have the same sense of humour, which is probably a bit childish and bad taste. So I think, first of all, we knew that we liked each other. We liked the same music. We liked the same films. We had lots of points of interest between us. So there was kind of sympa, as they say in French, kind of relationship. We also have different ways of working in that I tend to get up very early and do my best work first thing. Ali tends to work very late. And I'd experienced this with the publisher of the Scala book as well, Harvey Fenton at Fab Press. He had the same kind of working pattern. So I knew that it was a sort of jigsaw way of working, which was going to be quite successful. Ali is a great journalist and a really good sub-editor, and I absolutely relied on him with the book to iron out all my spelling mistakes and grammatical errors. And I think I write very quickly. Ali's very painstaking and polishes the work. And I think that the Scala documentary sort of went the same way. That all my years of working on, for distribution companies and, budget setting, spreadsheets, kind of procedural stuff, I brought all of that to the mix. And Ali, who's also a musician as well as a writer and a journalist, brought something more creative, I think, to the package.
It's also for those who believe in horoscopes and the zodiac. Jane's birthday is literally the day after mine.
Oh.
We're both Taurians, and for those who subscribe to such things, people will immediately suspect that's two bulls in a field, not budging, locking horns, and spraying mud with their hooves everywhere. But the upside of that is that Taurians are hard as nails, and we slog and we slog and we slog, and we have the most tremendous stamina, and we get through it.
Aha. Well, I mean, obviously, it definitely worked. Definitely worked. I really liked the fact that the interviews were in a Scala, because the architecture of the place is so distinctive. And it invokes, right, all of these feelings and emotions when you see it in that stairwell, and just, all of these different things. Like, when you were like working out the interviews and stuff like that, like, did you kind of know the best places in your mind where these interviews would take place, or was it just on the day, just seeing what worked?
That's a really interesting question, and we did have a lot of talk about this beforehand, before they even entered the building, and where we thought particular kind of interviewees would be best placed within the Scala. There's a bar right at the top of the Scala, which we immediately nicknamed the Edward Hopper Bar, because it has this beautiful kind of hopperish kind of vibe. It's got that kind of Bukowski hopperish vibe about it. It actually looks very sort of Lynchian. And there were certain filmmakers like Peter Strickland that I particularly wanted to place right slap bang there, because I thought he'd look great there. Mary Harron looks great up there as well. There were certain other zones that look sort of Kubrickian. The designer of the Scala is a sister of the current owner, called Tara Bissett, who has done an extraordinary design job inside in terms of the color scheme and what have you. And there are parts of the Scala now that look incredibly Kubrickian and very Lynchian as well. I think probably they're the two most foremost directors you possibly had in mind. And certain of our interviewees, like Paul Burston, the gay activist and writer, looks absolutely fabulous against that red wall. It's beautiful. Obviously, we had help from our film's colorist as well, fantastic colorist. But yeah, there's definitely different kind of vibes and atmospheres at different zones of that building. It's a real character in and of itself in the movie.
It is. We also there was a practical consideration that we were hiring the crew for the day, and it was a very small crew. We just had like one DOP, Sarah Appleton, who, and then our line producer, Michelle, who came from the National Film and TV School. She brought with her a sound recordist to do boom and mic recording to get good quality sound rather than just camera sound. So we were a very small crew, but we were working under COVID health and safety requirements. As you remember, you couldn't stand too close to each other, you had to mask up. So we're all sort of like doing all of this, wearing masks and being socially distanced. It's a big building, and we had to group the interviewees in different parts of the same building so that we didn't spend half a day sort of resetting up the lights and the camera and the sound equipment in very geographically remote parts of the building. So that practicality came in, and then that became complicated in the editing when we didn't want to kind of cut from one person in exactly the same part of the building.
Yes.
Then you saw somebody else in exactly the same part of the building. That is quite confusing to an audience. It sort of looks like people have just swapped chairs and you haven't even noticed. So yeah, it was not without its challenges.
Also, we were having a sort of film around the building work that was taking place during lockdown as well. And I think a few feathers were ruffled on both sides, put it that way. We certainly had challenges with the audio when you'd suddenly hear this tremendous clanging and banging for about an hour, and we'd have to sort of stop filming or try and have kind of polite words with them, which I don't think went down particularly well. Do you mind stop building? Do you mind stop doing your job while we arty filmmakers get on with what we're doing? So that wasn't great, but somehow we got around each other.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I think COVID, even though it was terrible in so many ways, it has kind of like given us certain things. And one of the things it gave us was that ability to access a building that was shut to the public. The other thing that it gave us was the understanding that we could work on Zoom with people who were located in other parts of the country. So we did our test interviews during lockdown by Zoom and got a whole load of audio recordings that we thought we were using to prep for the film. But in a couple of cases, they actually made their way into the final film. And the reason for this was that while nobody was working on big projects during lockdown, when it finished, people like Ben Wheatley immediately went off to make Meg 2 and was not available to be in our film, but we had like already recorded that audio of him, which is why you hear Ben talking about what King's Cross was like and talking about his experience of being in a rowdy audience during the thing and falling asleep during Terminator, but it's why you don't see him in the film.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. We lost out to a big shark, honestly.
Oh dear. Ben, can't trust him, eh? No, but it was just the amount of people that you spoke to and the names that you'd just be like, wait, I think I know that person. And it's just like, oh, that person looks familiar. It's like that voice sounds familiar. And it's just so fascinating that so many like creative institutions pass through the Scala. Like, because you see these buildings and these establishments as things which you can go and enjoy, whether it's like the Tate, the South Bank, the BFI, just all of these different places, but you don't really think about what it does to people, right? And how it can spark someone, maybe that is the spark for their career, right? The decisions that they make. So it was just fascinating seeing what the Scala brought to all of these individuals. Like, did you even envision that when you started this journey?
So we knew that by, over the years since the Scala closed, we knew it was special, but by the sort of 2000s, 2010s, you're starting to get more people like talking about their creative influences. And we started to understand that people of a certain age probably were in the Scala, like maybe they were also in the National Film Theatre or at the Everyman. People didn't only go to the one cinema. But there was a kind of thread, and I think the thread was also that the Scala, because it was quite unconventional as a place in terms of its programming, its presentation, the people that worked there, the people that were attracted to the Scala were people who were a little bit edgy, a little bit outsiderish, didn't feel entirely at home in maybe more conventional settings. So because of that, you had a sort of like left field creativity that links the people that were in our film. Maybe Ali could say more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. I think we sort of intuited that some people would have gone. We knew for a fact that some people did go, just through the grapevine, because people would tell us, oh, we saw someone and such at the Scala. Why don't you contact them? It was that kind of thing. And as I said, some people we just kind of intuited. We, in that horrible phrase, we reached out to about sort of 150 or 200 people. And, a lot of people said, no, I didn't go, or yes, I did go, but only like once or twice. I don't really feel my participation would be significant to your film. And some people were like, yeah, let's do this. Yeah, I can't wait. The interesting thing is, as we were making the film, we found out more and more people had gone that we hadn't asked because we just didn't know. I mean, I remember listening to a podcast in which the Beastie Boys, during that famous notorious, infamous 1987 tour when they first came to the UK, were taken to a particular cinema by Paul Simonon and Mick Jones, ex of The Clash, and they went to see Reanimator 2. And I'm like, I know exactly where that cinema would have been. There's only one place those guys went. So yeah. So frankly, yeah, the Beastie Boys of The Clash went to the Scala as well,
But also, podcast is such an interesting format that's really like come to the fore over the last like 10 years or so. And that was also the way that somebody alerted us to the fact that they'd been listening to a podcast in which James O'Brien, the great radio presenter, was interviewed. And he talked about going to see a Lindsay Anderson film at the Scala as a student at the LSE and being surprised when Clockwork Orange came on screen. So I think what podcasts do, like unlike other forms of journalism, is they allow a sort of like free-flowing conversation to unfold, which you don't really get that in kind of like newsprint or on radio in quite the same way, which tends to be much more editorially focused. And I should imagine that actually, if James had said this in a different context, it might well have been cut out of the story. But podcast has got the time and the space for it.
And just that's a really interesting point. And just to say that James O'Brien gets like like thousands of requests a day for things, but he very specifically chose to answer our email because he said it was one of the most random requests he'd ever heard, and it completely intrigued him, which we loved.
Oh, that's great. I think that's very true, Jane, because a lot of the times, but you even get it with podcasts, right? A lot of the times, I'll throw in a request to speak to someone, and the PR agency will be like, oh yeah, we can give you 10 minutes or we can give you 15 minutes. And it's just like, that doesn't really work.
Enough, yeah.
Doesn't work. You can't have a great conversation in that amount of time. And I think that's the issue a lot of the times with radio and print, that the conversations are so short, or the word count is short. So even though they might have a long conversation, they've got to cut it down to 100 words. And
absolutely, our most fascinating conversations have always taken place on podcasts because you really can broaden that conversation out. It's been great.
Yeah. But I thought the conversations in the documentary were fantastic, and just the way everyone was so infused, right? I'm sure you've had conversations in the past with people, and it can be like getting blood from a stone, which I don't actually understand that expression. I don't, but stones don't bleed. But anyway, it can be difficult.
I can tell you as a former film journalist that going into interviews certain celebrities and hotels was just nightmarish experiences. And desperately trying to come up with interesting questions for them while they just gaze at you just with complete contempt. Like just answer the set questions and go away. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, what is really, sorry, Jen. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to like chip in and say we did do our research. We didn't interview anyone that we hadn't already spoken to on the telephone. So we knew whether people could talk and what their enthusiasm levels were. We did have a couple of people that we interviewed whose style of presentation was a bit more downbeat than others. We were actively looking for people with energy that we could capture in our film,
Yeah.
because we knew that we wanted it to be a kind of fast and furious, kaleidoscopic, expressionistic piece of work. The music does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like establishing the energy and the mood of the film. In a couple of cases, we had one interviewee who talked for 4 hours. We interviewed like 50 people. So, and our film is 90 minutes. So obviously there's not very much you can do with a 4-hour interview. The most successful interviewees that we had were people that speak very naturally in sound bites, and they were funny. So we chose to pick out bits of the interviews that made us laugh or cry, because that was the sort of starting point. It's starting to boil down the interviews into something manageable.
Right.
You'll notice a lot of the interviewees are having a blast while they're talking. I mean, a lot of them are just laughing as they're talking. You know, people were so happy to kind of be there.
Yeah, no, I think that really, the energy really comes across. And that's why I'm fascinated by it. I was because having conversation is not an easy thing, right? People think it's you just talk, right? Oh, how hard can talking be? But to get people to be able to open up, to get people to exude that energy, that excitement for something, right? It takes a lot. You have to ask the right things. You have to create the right vibe in the room. So when you were doing this, and you've got people in these different parts of the building, right? So maybe people are on their own for a little bit. Did you give people music to listen to? Like, what was the thing to kind of create that energy and keep that energy up for you be able to capture it?
Firstly, the Scala itself as a building. I mean, as I say, you know yourself when you go into places you haven't been for a very long time, whether it's an old house or where you lived or an old school building, that memory trapdoor just springs open and it all comes flooding out. And I think, when they entered the building, the hairs stood on the back of their neck and their eyes just bulged, and they were like, "Oh my God, I remember what I was doing in that corner, whether it was illegal or not, in that space, what I was watching." Yeah, I mean that location massively helps, and we were so lucky to get the Scala as a living location.
Oh man, definitely. It'd be interesting to, think what this might have been if you didn't have the Scala building. If you had to do the interviews somewhere else, like what would this have been? Because I'm sure you could have got interesting conversations, but they would have been different, I imagine.
I think that's such a good point, Kevin. And, we looked at a lot of documentaries when we were preparing for the film. And we knew that we didn't want to do a sort of studio-based, when you see there's a kind of like a sort of documentary trope, which is like the person being interviewed comes in and they get filmed settling down in their chair.
Yeah.
There's a real sort of trend for that at the moment, and we knew that we didn't want to, do that, do that sort of trope. We knew that we weren't going to have much space for people to talk, so there were going to be fragments, and often you'd hear their voices, but you'd be looking at something completely different, like a bit of archive footage or a movie clip or a graphic or something like that. So yeah, that's how it sort of came together.
I mean, if we were going to do this again, I definitely want more people walking around the building itself, because whenever people do that, I'm always very excited. When you've got someone like Princess Julia, the DJ and great fashion icon walking down the stairs, or you've got one of our ushers, Vic Roberts, ferreting around in the back of the Scala. It's always very visually exciting to me. So to be honest, I wish we'd done a little bit more of that. People literally wandering around, I don't know why we didn't actually, to be honest.
It was about logistics. The reason we did try that at the beginning, and we used quite a bit of that footage actually comparatively in the film. But it was cumbersome and it was awkward. And when we had like 4 different interviewees in
Yeah,
the same day, and we wanted to give them an hour each to speak, trying to
yeah.
do the pickup shots actually took quite a long time, you know.
That is true, and you know, as Jane says, to herd kind of like sound people and you know camera people up and down these interminable number of marble stairs is actually quite exhausting. I mean, the people who worked at the Scala would often have stories about humping, you know, film canisters with you know in a building without a lift up interminable numbers of stairs for hours on end, up and down, up and down. And I think when you're making a film, you know, there's obviously, as I say, there's a great temptation to go creatively off the leash and just have people buzzing around everywhere. But you're right, it's just not really practical.
Yeah, I've carried film canisters upstairs a few. I worked in a cinema when I was at uni, and I was a floor supervisor and in the projection, but there was only one lift. So when the cinema sold out, it's all customers in the lift, and I'm trying to like take the film from the bottom booth to the top booth, and it's just like and you just right gotta take the stairs and just lugging Lord of the Rings up the stairs, and you're just like, god damn.
I feel you. When I was a kid, I used to I used to deliver cash registers, like huge, heavy metal cash registers, to stalls around the Ideal Home exhibition, the Daily Mail Ideal Home exhibition, and we had one service lift which would stink of cockroaches, and I would see them. They this kind of brown swarm, kind of nesting in the walls of the lift, and the smell was indescribable. But yeah, I yeah, to hump those metal cash registers in the days before, you know, electronic Casios was quite, or even, you know, drop and pin machines, or whatever it is, was an extraordinary experience. Absolutely.
Oh dear. But you know, the way it was done, just it does work. It does work. Sorry. The visual style of this, whose kind of, you know, imagination did that pop from? Like, where did you settle on that aesthetic?
Well, we looked at, like I said, we looked at quite a lot of fairly conventional documentaries in the lead up to making the film, but we also looked at some feature films, non-documentaries that and there are 3 that are our biggest stylistic influences in making this documentary. And the first one was The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, Julian Temple film about the Sex Pistols, which is kind of like a sort of mock documentary in some ways. It's very rough and ready. The second one was This Is Spinal Tap, which is also a mock documentary and has those kind of like interview sequences in it. And that's what we were actually trying to capture with some of our interview sequence. And Ali will tell you about the third.
I mean, the third, which I think is probably our most important stylistic influence, is 24-Hour Party People by Michael Winterbottom. Which, funny enough, is again kind of a sort of fake docudrama, you know, or it is a docudrama in a way. Yeah, and just the energy and anarchy of that film, and just the way it kind of weaves, you know, those kind of postmodern kind of flourishes with is this real or is this not real, or is this someone's mismemory or what? Was incredibly exciting to us. So yeah, those 3 for sure.
And also, this is, even though, as you can see, we're no spring chickens, I'm 60 and Ali's 50-something. This is our first film. This is our debut film. And I think that there's a grand tradition with debut filmmakers of just throwing everything and the kitchen sink at their first film.
Because you never know when you get another chance. You just think, you know what I mean? It's just like, just pour everything. And also, just on a kind of graphic aesthetic level, the film was meant to replicate those kind of amazing programs that the Scala had, those very kind of punk inspired, fanzine inspired kind of programs, you know, very eclectic, very kind of low and high art together. In the film, we literally have high art talking to low art in the shape of John Comfort, talking about the warriors. And it's that kind of feeling that low and high art are equal, and there is no division between them. They shouldn't be. You know, each has their merits. And that was a big kind of stylistic, you know, influence on how we use graphics and how we used the devices of film genre itself in our film. I mean, we've got things like sort of split screen, lots of grain, lots of jump cuts, which we deliberately didn't smooth over. Because what the hell is punk? Leave them in. Do you know what I mean? So it was that kind of attitude, yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought it really stood out. It looked great. I struggled with some of it on the visual front, but I could see what you were doing. And
yeah, I mean, I
I
think the thing is, Kevin, you're right. There's a lot of text on screen. We relied on, you know, a lot of like on-screen labels saying who people are, but also dates and explanations, because there's no narration, there's no voiceover, which is a little bit unusual for documentaries. You usually have something that ties it all together nicely. But I do realize that is extremely challenging for actually all the audience to have so much information thrown at them, you know, visually as well as audibly. But for someone who has, you know, a sight impairment of any nature, it must be an absolute nightmare. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you know, you do kind of be like, oh man, like I wonder what that was, you know. So there is that, but like looking at the website, there's you know, all the information there, and other places. I think I've been able to kind of garner some of it. And when I get my Blu-ray working, I'll be able to check out the audio description of it. But one thing I am always curious about, is it is something you see a lot, right? At the beginning of a film, there'll be like, this is how it began, or at the end, it will finish at a point, and there'll be like, and in the years to come, they did this and this and this, but it's just text. So, from a filmmaker's point of view, what, like, when you're putting all of this together, what is the kind of decisions that you're making to do it visually rather than have someone narrate that bit? Even if you know, you don't necessarily have to have a narrator all the way through, you know, like some documentaries, but just narrating some of the larger text. Like, how do you weigh that kind of thing up?
I think we couldn't really. Sorry, Jane.
No,
No, I'm sure we both have things to speak to this question. It's a really good question. I mean, I think we couldn't. You know, if you're going to use a narrator, you probably have to use a narrator all the way through. Don't have a narrator partially, because it just sounds weird. I think also because this really is a film of voices as well. To have one more voice into the mix would have just been overkill. So we made the decision to text, possibly because we're writers. We're both writers. So you know, we're not really filmmakers. We're writers. So that's a kind of that's, you know, we were taking kind of writerly approach to this film. Certainly in the way, certainly kind of editorially. That's how we sort of set out things in terms of how we sort of group together the acts, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And just kind of narrativizing something that's actually an incredibly sprawling and complex subject. I mean, goodness, I mean, I wish we had, you know, a 12-hour miniseries to do justice to the Scala, which in itself probably wouldn't begin to do justice to the Scala story. We only had 96 minutes, but yeah, I think that possibly has a thing to play with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of narration aside, the film has a sort of fairly classical narrative structure, an Act 1 and an Act 3 that are half as long as Act 2, which has Act 2 Part 1, Act 2 Part 2, at the end of which classically everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And in our film, that's the moment at which you get the cinema programmer, Mark Vallon, the American guy, talking about an incident happening that ended in a death at the Scala. And then it sort of spirals down, and then you kind of pick up a little bit and look at the legacy. But our producer, Andy Stark, was also our editor. He's a great producer who really wants to edit. And one of the things that he would often say to us was, no, we're going to kind of like start this story here to kind of hook people in. People aren't stupid. We don't have to explain everything bit by bit. And there's a sort of classic filmmaking maxim of show, don't tell, which must be, again, very annoying to frustrating to people who have a sight impairment, because, you know, you need to be told, and if you can't rely on the visual information because of your sight, that's a real tough thing. So I really thank you for bearing with the film, with all those challenges. But, you know, like I say, I think there's so much information flying around. And I know that people who watch our film, you know, who are fully sighted, miss a lot of things about it, because often it's on the second or even the third viewing that they're seeing and hearing things that they didn't notice before. But our subject is repertory, and repertory means repeating program. So I think that's kind of appropriate.
I think the film, as Jane infers, definitely demands or invites repeated viewings. Absolutely, because there is so, as you say, there is so much detail in it that you'd miss the first time round. I mean, we've seen it now personally about 7,945 times, and there's still stuff that I see in it going, oh wow, particularly on a bigger screen, you know, not on a laptop. To our credit, we did actually go quite. We could have done a lot more with the text. You know, certainly in captioning, and we were very generous, I think, and spare with the captions. I mean, for instance, there are people there in that film who have done and are doing extraordinary things, which when we were captioning them, like for instance, Joanne Seller, who's in the film, who was 19 years old when she was dragging dead bodies out of the Scala, went on to become Paul Thomas Anderson's producer. You know, she's produced things like Boogie Nights or There Will Be Blood, you know, Magnolia. She's a really big figure in Hollywood. And it was my sort of, and I wish that we could put in the caption, this is Joanne's, you know, she's like big shot Hollywood producer. But it was Jane's decision. She's like, no, do you know what? If people are interested in these people, Google them or search engine them, you know, they'll find out. There were other layers, you know. Same with people like Chris Watson, who's the guy, the sound engineer you see at the end, near the end of the film, who was the co-founder of one of the most extraordinarily influential bands that ever were, Cabaret Voltaire, you know, the electronic Sheffield band. But we don't spoon feed the audience in this way. We don't say, look who it is. If they're interested, they'll hopefully find out, you know.
I, at this point, unfortunately, have to give you, for myself, a 5-minute warning. I have to log off at 2 o'clock sharp and dash out of the house to get my broken tooth fixed. But Kevin, I think that Ali can continue if you would like to continue the conversation beyond 2 p.m.
Okay, great, cool, thank you. With, you know, 90 minutes. Right, what was the thinking when it came to the length of this? What, like, was there, you know, a thought of making it longer?
That's such a great question, and you've really put your finger on it. So I wanted to. So I think, as a former cinema programmer, cinema manager, I like films to be 85 minutes long, because you can get many screenings in one day, and you don't lose the audience's attention, and you keep the energy up. Ali wanted the film to be about 3 hours.
3 hours long, absolutely. I thought if Edgar Wright can get away with it with his Sparks film, why shouldn't we? You know, and he's got just as many interviews, or actually more. I mean, to be honest, that's the underconfidence of a debutante filmmaker, to think that you couldn't somehow corral a story into 96 minutes. And you know, a lot of things come out of a kind of underconfidence of a debutante filmmaker. But then when you do them and then you realize, you know, it's perfect. Actually, that's what it should be.
But I think also, quite seriously, if we had the luxury of 3 hours, which probably wouldn't have been a cinema experience, unlike the Sparks film, it would have been something like a sort of Netflix 3-part or a BBC 3-part arts programme.
I'm not saying we don't want that, but
Well,
we haven't got that.
We would have loved that, because what we would have done is go into a lot of detail about how the Scala was set up in 1976 to 1978. We've gone into a lot of detail there, and a lot more detail about how it finished, because there's just a very quick caption on screen that says the lease ran out. And I think people blink and miss it. I'm still getting people coming up to me now saying, so how do you feel about the fact that Clockwork Orange killed the Scala? And I'm like, it didn't. The lease ran out. You saw that on the film. And they're like, eh? So I think we would have had a lot more. 3 hours would have been lovely. We would have put a lot of information in that maybe made more sense. But the beauty of the sort of 90-minute version is that it has this energy and it has this sort of expressionistic freshness about it that audiences have really responded to.
Yeah, no, I think the time, it is a good time, right? Because I think you consume it and you can get into it, and you're not distracted or anything like that. It works. I think a longer time, it's definitely fascinating. And is that something that you could do, maybe like create a different edit for, BBC, Netflix or something like that?
That's a good question, Kevin. And actually, not in the cinematic medium or the visual medium. We're currently editing a massive project, which is the oral history of 80s and 90s subculture, using the trims and the outtakes that we necessarily produced during this movie. Because obviously, when we interview people for an hour at a time, we're only using a fraction, a thumbnail of what they spoke about. But given that they talked as an aggregate, many hours about subculture, what we're sitting on is an incredible opportunity for a visionary publisher out there to pick up what would be, in effect, an overview of subculture from the 80s and the 90s, using the Scala as a kind of little peg to hang on.
Or even something like a gallery like the Tate, right? A huge exhibition like the V&A, exploring with some video installations and, the programs and everything like that could be fascinating.
We'll talk to our friend Isaac Julian about that. We'll say, yeah, how do you do that, Isaac?
Listen, guys, I've got to sign off now. I just want to say, Kevin, it's been really lovely speaking with you. And I'm sorry to cut my bit of the conversation short, but I will leave you in the very capable hands of Ali Catterall.
Good luck at the dentist. Is your dentist at 2:30, Jane?
I've got to go. It's 2:15. See you guys.
Oh, okay.
Right. Thanks, Jane.
Cheers.
Bye.
the very incapable hands of Ali Catterall, who cannot speak to any of the managerial stuff, unfortunately, because that's all James' department. But I can definitely speak as a messed up punter who went to the Scala, and just as a first-time filmmaker, sort of dealing with some of those challenges. Yeah.
I mean, what was this like, having gone to the Scala as a 16-year-old? And then, being able to tell that history of it.
Oh man, it was an enormous privilege and an honor, and just to work with Jane, who, as I said, she is Madame Scala. Frankly, I mean, what she doesn't know about the Scala could be written on the head of a pin. It's just an extraordinary honor. I mean, I always kind of joke that she's my Baron Frankenstein and I'm her monster, because she literally made me into the film I became, having gone to the Scala. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very strange, surreal experience, but also a massive privilege to be able to bring this incredibly important institution story to the screen. I mean, I genuinely think the Scala is more significant and important, as a London institution than something like, I don't know, the ICA or the Roundhouse or whatever. It really is huge, and I think it's really almost the subculture equivalent of something like the Victoria and Albert Museum. Do you know what I mean? It is that big. It's that sprawling and that important, actually.
Yeah, it's always fascinating with places like this. And when they've gone and you hear people talking about it, I used to go to this a nightclub in Peckham called Laserdrome. It was drum and bass, and it was, oh my god, it was such a great venue, man. Like you go there, and you know, like people like Brocky and Det, Groove Rider, Fabio be
Oh
playing,
man,
hitting the
wow.
walls like hubla hubla. You know what I mean? And then when the lights came on, you'd look and be like, oh, this place is nasty.
It's a
But
dump, yeah.
when the lights are off and the music is pumping, it was just incredible. And I stumbled across a Facebook page, and you had loads of people talking about Laserdrome. And it was just the way people talk about these things. It's just fascinating. So, you know what I mean? Having the opportunity to tell that story, like I can only imagine how just incredible that would have been.
It's an honor, but also incredibly scary because there are so many people who went. Like 1 million people went through the doors of the Scala, and also you've got a whole generation who never went because they were too young. Some of whom weren't even born when the Scala in 1999 set up as a nightclub, but who have their kind of Atlantean, Lost City of Atlantis kind of idea of what the Scala was, particularly programmers and staff of some other cinemas in London, particularly people like, you know, the staff of the Garden Cinema in Covent Garden, or the staff of the Prince Charles, who very unashamedly take their legacy from the Scala, particularly in their showings of all-nighters and things like that, or the Rio in Dalston. You know, things, single screen cinemas that have that kind of vibe of the Scala about them, although not 100% because they'd be shut down for health and safety reasons. But yeah, so it was scary, you know, when you've got people whose memories are very different, or let's say whose memories kind of clash, and who also feel an extreme sense of ownership over the Scala, as we all do, as I do, you know, as I did. I mean, it literally became one of the foundation stones of my life. Absolutely, you know, one of the biggest blocks of cultural DNA in me, you know, and certainly for Jane, who started a family there, you know, married the front of house manager, took the Scala cats home, so it really became Jane's family, you know.
Yeah.
And for the rest of us, it was a metaphorical family. It was a family of different kinds of tribes and people, and you know, all kinds of different kind of alternative folk who all came together to create this kind of firestorm of energy, you know, and artistry.
Yeah, that's something. It did remind me a little bit of the Prince Charles, but you know, the Prince Charles does seem like Scala light, as it were.
Yeah,
Because as you said,
yeah.
you couldn't do that now. You couldn't do.
No. I mean, I mean, God bless them. I mean, they do have a good they do have a good program. I mean, funny enough, someone like the Garden Cinema has the kind of eclecticism of the program of the Scala. I mean, they really are doing God's work, I think, in that respect. You know, good on them. But yeah. Even if you took a tincture of the Garden, a tincture of the Rio Dalston, a tincture of Prince Charles, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't even begin to get close to what the Scala had. But they're trying. They're really trying, and God bless them for that.
Oh yeah, I've had some great times at the Prince Charles, but I felt envious. I felt it because it seemed like the place that I would have gone to. You know,
Yeah.
If I could have, I would have gone to that place, man. It did seem great. But how do you, and you briefly mentioned it, but how do you deal with like the clashing memories? Because, you know, it's even when you talk about to your friends, right, about something that happened, and you'd be like, yo, remember when you did this? And you're like, I didn't do that. And be like, yeah, you did. No,
Yeah.
remember, we were here and blah, blah, blah. Right. So I imagine with this, right, people would be like, oh, the night when this happened, and someone's like, it didn't happen like that. Like, how do you kind of coalesce that kind of stuff?
There's a funny theory that memory actually kind of deletes backwards, if you like. So the older we get, it's a bit like a VHS tape. You know what I mean? So, you know, the memory is kind of going rewinding like that. And that's why sometimes when we're very old, we have extraordinarily vivid memories of the youngest point in our lives. that can't remember what we had for breakfast.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case with me, you know, in my advanced dinosaur years of 53, 54. Weirdly enough, we have Nick Kent, the rock journalist in our film, the great rock journalist, talking about the extraordinarily iconic gigs. The word iconic is incredibly overused, but in this case, I think it fits. Of Lou Reed and Iggy Pop and the Stooges on consecutive nights on the 14th and 15th of July, 1972, with the photos taken by Mick Rock, who was in the audience, and his photos became the covers of Transformer and Raw Power. Just incredible slice of rock history, and they all took place at the Scala, or it was called King's Cross Cinema in those days, but essentially it's the Scala. And Nick Kent, who possibly, I may be doing a disservice, but possibly can't remember what he had for yesterday's breakfast, could recall in second by second detail those Lou Reed and the Stooges gigs. It was incredible. He spoke to us for about 40 minutes non-stop with a second by second blow account of those gigs. It was absolutely extraordinary. So that's, and you know, that's an account of someone whose memory is crystal clear and sharp. But as you rightly say, other memories, particularly when it comes to the Scala, and particularly because, let's be honest here, a lot of the time spent at the Scala was in a heightened state of consciousness, including myself. I remember waking up screaming during a screening of Dougal and the Blue Cat.
Oh my God.
You know, I think in those cases there is a kind of argument to say, do you know what? Just print the myth. Just print the myth and sort, you know, sort out the bones later. You know, pick out the bones of it later. Do you know what I mean? Also, I mean, you know, when you talk to so many people as we did, I mean, we've got nearly 50 people on our film. Obviously, there's going to be clashing memories. That's just going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you have to pick the one that most people seem to have agreed on. You know, there's a point of fact. There's a story that Stephen Woolley, the owner of the Scala, tells of the late great Shane McGowan urinating into the audience during a screening of Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and being manhandled and thrown out by Stephen Woolley for that. Apparently, it wasn't the first time he did it. Apparently, this was quite a thing for Shane. But when you talk to other people, they will say, no, it wasn't Stephen Woolley who dragged him out. It was me. I was the bouncer, and I manhandled him out into the street. And also, by the way, it wasn't Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. It was a Roger Corman film called Let's Kill Uncle. So yeah, people's memories are fallible over the years, you know. But as I say, you know, in many cases, the myth, you know, is almost more important, you know, than the truth. I mean, I'm committing heresy here because I'm a journalist, and for me, you know, the truth is you know, is the grail, you know. So I should not be speaking like this, but I think as a filmmaker, you know, in a different discipline, and as a creative, there's an argument for saying, you know what, let's go with it. Let's go with the myth. You know, they are bigger. You know,
yeah,
so it's more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're covering a news story, right? Yes, the truth is the
completely.
most important
Yeah,
thing.
I wouldn't just make stuff up as a journalist, you know.
I mean, some people have,
but you know. Well, I probably have, you know, at some point, but it's certainly not to any detriment of anybody.
But no,
let's cut this bit out.
It is, but I do agree that you know, the myth, there's a charm about it, right? And especially when they're not lying, right? They do believe what they're saying, and so there's something about that, and just the fact that there's so many kind of memories about this one thing, and even if they're slightly different, it just helps tell that story.
It's great. It just gives it another element. It's absolutely, yeah, it gives it another level. Yeah.
You know, because you did so much work here, was there ever a thought of like taking some of this material and basically kind of creating like bonus material for the website or social media?
Totally. So, this film, I mean, I know podcasts are eternal and people could be listening to this in 2070 for all I know. And if you are, I really hope things have gotten better. Please, I hope you'd save the world, frankly, because we're in a dreadful old state here in 2024. But yeah, okay. So, but to yoke it to a particular time and era, and specifically this year, the film comes out on BFI Blu-ray on the 22nd of January. And there are tons of extras by us on that Blu-ray of the extra interviews we did. Absolutely, yeah. So you're in for a treat. The BFI put together a really beautiful package there. And as I said, if we're lucky enough, and I hope by 2070, it's come apart because publishing is quite glacial. That we have actually got this kind of oral history out, this book of oral history of subculture, then that will speak to an awful lot of that as well, and it will make this film look like a thumbnail, and it really will, like a fraction of what we had, because there is gold there. There's absolute gold, and I wish we could have included so much more of it, but as I said, we've only got a 96-minute film.
Yeah, but it whets the appetite. Right, it does make you want to dig deeper.
I'm glad you said that. I really hope it does for audiences. I hope they come away from this going what with an incredibly long list of films that obviously they'll spend the rest of their life trying to chase down, but also musically as well. And just it's a bit like when I went to the Scala, as a lot of 16, 17-year-olds, and this experience is universal. Is that it's the kind of time in your life when you're finding out sort of who you are and what you like, and kind of one informing the other,
Yeah.
And the Scala was a fantastic labyrinth, like an Alexandrian library of culture for that reason. Because in that age, again, or for younger minds generally, when you find something you're interested in, it leads to something else, and you start joining the dots between, a movie or an album or a book, or a piece of art. And it needn't necessarily be a cinema that you find this in. It could be a vintage clothes shop, or a great record, or a great secondhand record shop, or a bookshop, or a library, or anything that really sparks that in you. That really makes you kind of go, wow, there is so much culture that I'm interested in that I want to find out.
Yeah, it reminded me of listening to music.
Yeah.
Because I just remember listening to music and then being like, that sounds like a Premiere beat. Was that a Premiere beat? And then you look at the liner notes and you'd be like, you get the magnifier out and be like,
yeah.
Oh shit, that was Premiere. Oh, it was recorded in D&D Studios. I thought so. Yes. Wait, what was that sound? It was that sample. Oh, I didn't know that was sampled. Oh,
I'm so glad you said that. Because I was going to say, one of my favorite websites, which is just, I mean, you would lose time on the, like literally you'd forget to eat on this website because you'll be going down. It's whosampled.com. You know whosampled.com? Which just, oh, wow. Which just basically tells you who sampled whatever sample that is and whatever record that is. And you just go down that rabbit hole because you find out they sampled that, but also they themselves have been sampling that, and they, it's like a hall of mirrors of sampling, and that's when you find out so much. Your music encyclopedia is massively expanded from that sort of thing, which I'm so grateful for.
Oh man, I've stumbled upon so many different people from that, like from going to gigs and checking out the warm-up acts. That's how I came. The editor opened for oh gosh, I forget the name. The song "Sweet Troubled Soul," and I can't remember who the band was. But yeah, they were the opening act, and who are these guys? And it's the editors. Is you stumble on so many people in that way. So just watching this made me go, oh, I not seen that film. I need to check that film out. And oh yeah, that's fascinating. I need to do that.
And it's and again, that's a kind of, I mean, when I'm going on to whosample.com, obviously the majority of the music is kind of hip hop, and and that's where I'm finding a lot of my connections from. But there's definitely kind of thematic parallels between that and the kind of post-punk kind of era, in
Yeah.
which people are mixing and matching, you know, culture and fashions and stylistic things, and they're all going to this great big sort of melting pot. And that is again is what we're sort of trying to do with the film. You know, we're trying to just as in this kind of kitchen sink kind of way, as Jane said, just trying to just kind of just blast people with so many different kinds of high and low art, if you like.
Yeah, the fascinating thing is, Ali, right? Watching Scala, and then a few weeks later, I watched another documentary which invoked this as a similar kind of emotion. It was Simonde, right?
Right.
Getting it back together. I think from Tim Mackenzie Jones, I think is the guy that directed it, and it's just about a band who made 3 great albums, but then just weren't getting played. So they kind of split up, but then they're getting sampled and, you know, used all the time. And then they got back together recently. And I think both of these documentaries, very different, but invoke that emotion that wants you to explore, wants you to dig deeper, and they're done in these different ways from a lot of normal kind of, you know, typical documentaries, which, you know, like, you know, just as I know I said about the visual aspect of it at the beginning and the end and things like that, not being able to see that, but even with that, right? I got so much from Scala.
I'm
You know
so
what I mean?
glad,
Like,
you know, because
gives you so much, you know?
I'm so glad. I'm so pleased you said it, because we were not interested in the least of making some sort of dewy-eyed nostalgia trip with a bunch of old blokes sitting around weeping, you know, about what they'd lost. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, okay, there's a little tiny bit of that. But this was more, you know, this is a real call to action. You know, this is a real, you know, to say, first of all, um, please go and do likewise. You know, find your community, find your tribe, and do something like this. Um, we tend, by a sort of significant metric, we tend to get two kinds of sets of people who come up to us after screenings. One are genuinely sort of 60-year-old blokes who with tears in their eyes, wearing Scala t-shirts that are literally falling apart on their bodies as they're walking, who remember with infinite clarity what they went to see, where it was. And so, you know, this film for them is time travel. It's very immersive time travel. And the other group of people we tend to get are young women under 25 who weren't even born when the 1999 iteration of the Scala started up as a nightclub, who come up and say this film has inspired them so much that at the very least they want to set up their own film club, or more permanently go into distribution or exhibition or curation or what have you. And I can't tell you how happy about that I am. You know, and that is the call to action aspect of this film. It's, you know, if you're inspired by this, go and track down those films. Please enlarge your mind, and set up film clubs. Do this. You know, try. You know, I know that, you know, leaseholds and rents are extremely extortionate, but if at all possible, do this in your front room. Get friends round. Go and watch films like that. Curate film nights of your own. You know. We need to bring that back, as opposed to that kind of very homogenized experience of sitting in front of streamers going flick, 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 for an hour and a half, and by the time you've finished, there's nothing you actually want to watch.
Yeah, there's definitely something about watching things with people. It's the thing that I love about a film festival, like coming out of the film festival and you're talking to other people and you're being like, yo, so didn't you think it was interesting when they did that thing? And they're like, huh, I didn't look at it like that. I thought it was more this. You'd be like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting take, right? I think I have to think about that when I write this up. You know what I mean? So you get that experience. Like, you don't always get it out of every press screening you go to. Sometimes everyone just disappears and don't want to talk. But when people want to talk, it's incredible. I love that
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Totally. I was always quite jealous when I was a working film critic, of going to those press screenings, and most film reviewers are quite insular, quite shy kind of people. So at the end of the screening, most people kind of like scurry out,
Mm.
into the streets of Soho or whatever. You never see them again. Whereas my friends in the music press were all moshing together in the mosh pit, whichever magazine or paper they were writing for. They were and they all knew each other, you know. But film reviewing is very different, quite solitary, in that
Yes.
respect.
Yeah.
Sitting in the dark and then dashing off again. So there wasn't so much of that kind of gathering together in groups and talking for hours and hours about what you thought of it. Yeah, that's very true.
But it would be fascinating, like if you could do, because I think it's Unicorn Nights or something like that at the Prince Charles. Like, but if you could do like a Scala Nights, and then you take a film, like a memorable film from those Scala days, and and everyone can go, and then there's a Q&A afterwards, and you just talk about it. That would be great if something like that could happen.
I hope so. I mean, it's funny, but you still can't see quite a lot of the films that the Scala put on, not easily. They're out of distribution or out of print or whatever. I mean, Thundercrack, which is probably the most notorious of all of Scala's offerings, and that's saying something. For those who don't know Thundercrack, it's about a 3-hour long psychic. Oh God, I can't begin to explain it. It's kind of art house porn. But really nasty, shonky art house porn, that's nearly inaudible. It's very boring and long stretches, but it's then punctuated by the most literally eye-popping, jaw-dropping things. Just absolutely extraordinary. They showed it at the BFI a couple of nights ago.
Oh, okay.
An NFT1, and a crowded NFT1, which is absolutely bizarre to think that people were sitting elbow to knees watching a porno. And there were quite a few comments on social media saying Edgar Wright was sitting behind me laughing hysterically. You think, where was just the experience of watching a porno in an absolutely crowded, shrieking with hilarity audience is quite something to consider, isn't it? So yeah, if they were going to show something, it would probably have to be something like Thundercrack or Santa Sangre. Thundercrack you can get on Blu-ray from an American company on import, but that's the only way you could get it. Things like Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which again is showing in our BFI Scala seasonal this January. Again, incredibly hard to get hold of. It's I think at the moment you can get it on DVD in Spain or something, but it's not been picked up here. So it's still very hard to find a lot of those kind of classic Scala movies. They're not all on. You can't all access them by the flick of a mouse or via a streamer.
Oh man. But I think that's the beauty of this documentary. It kind of documents all of that stuff, lets people know that this did actually happen. This was around.
Yeah, it's a taster. It's like a taster menu, I hope, for incredible cinema. Yeah.
It's the start of the rabbit hole, my friend. It's the start.
It really is. A very dirty rabbit hole. Very long and dirty rabbit hole.
Oh, this
with
has
two-headed rabbits.
Yeah, this has been great, man. I've got a Werner Holtzworth, not Werner Holtz, a documentary screening I have to pop off to in a second. But
what are you seeing?
It's a new documentary that's coming out on Friday. About
is this Radical Dreamer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Showing at the BFI today.
It's called Radical Dreamer, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it is.
Yeah.
No, it's fun. Yeah. Again, it's one of those kind of things. Given that it's Herzog, who really deserves, like we do, frankly, a kind of 12-hour mini-series, mini-part series. But yeah, it's a good taster. It's a good tasting menu of Herzog. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. But this has been great, man. I really appreciate you and Jane giving me your time, because
Thank you. No, this has been fantastic. As I say, our best, our favorite encounters are on podcasts because you really can enlarge the argument. We're not tied to particular, a rigid kind of time scale and answering the same questions. And I mean, we welcome all press. It's lovely, but with podcasts, it really is something special, and this has been particularly special. So I really, really thank you for some really great questions.
No worries, man. I always I'm fascinated to hear the stuff myself. So I'm just asking things that are fascinating me, right? Because I don't, I guess finding out what your favorite color or your favorite meal could be interesting, but really, what I mean? It doesn't really mean much. One thing I'm curious about is the next thing, right? That creating this into this bigger project. Would you break it down by year? So a volume a year, or is it just going to be a large volume?
Thematically, so it would literally be like sex, drugs, rock and roll, but it would kind of have a chronology. We would impose a kind of chronology on it. Absolutely,
right.
But yeah, it would be kind of impossible to do it otherwise because it would be so. I mean, my goodness, I mean, I'm a pro editor, but this. And we may never get it published. As I say, I hope if people are listening in in 3000, the year 3000, that this book is digitized into people's brains somehow. But it is a massive editing job, and it's going to take quite a long time. And at the moment, because we're still on the kind of press tour, we haven't had a single second to do anything. My house is a tip. It's absolute. Oh my goodness me! I wouldn't invite anyone around. It's absolute tip. I'm eating rubbish. I'm just eating crisps and chocolate on the move. I understand now why a lot of performers are a bit overweight, because when you're on the move doing all this, you're just grabbing rubbish. We're kind of exhausted in a really brilliant way. We've just been running on fumes and adrenaline since last July when we had our world premiere in Bologna. Just been going to endless film festivals and events and Q&As and because we say yes to everybody, because we love everybody. Why wouldn't we? And
a lot of people that don't. So
that's really sad. That's really sad. I think we say yes to everyone because it's important to get the message out there. Someone said, another filmmaker said to us the other day, me being nearly 54 and Jane being nearly 60, like, where are you getting the stamina from all this? This is like, what are you doing? You must be wrecked. And we were like, but why wouldn't you? It's brilliant. It's the adrenaline is keeping us on the move. And also it helps that we're dragging around this incredibly anarchic, upbeat film that we get a lovely feedback loop from the audience with, because they're enjoying it so much. So it really pumps us up and keeps us up. Keeps us our old bones young.
The passion is clear, right? The passion resonates in the conversation and resonates in the documentary. So you've done a tremendous job, man.
Oh man, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been such at the stroke of midnight, New Year's Eve, I was around my friends. I was in this house actually. I'm cat sitting right now. My house is not half as lovely as this one that you can see behind you. And at sort of New Year's Eve, I just started weeping. I think, oh my God, it was so hard. Because it is, who knew, right? That filmmaking was incredibly difficult. Who knew? My Lord. I've written books before, and that was far easier, even though book writing is very hard too. But this, oh my Lord, it's as Jane says, it's like putting together a 3,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but there's no picture on the front of the box.
It's all sky. It's all blue pieces.
yeah. Exactly that. So, but luckily, it's also a very collaborative experience. This is why I'm slightly sort of sniffy about the auteur theory. I just think, no. Everyone's chipping in, everyone's helping to make that movie, and it's been such an amazing collaborative experience, particularly with our editors. Ed Mills, who's absolute trooper just editing this, you know, when he can, and our producer editor Andy Stark, who's just, you know, legendary, who's Ben Wheatley and Peter Strickland's producer, who, as Jane says, is more of a kind of frustrated sort of editor, really, who's just had such a creative input in this and regularly led us out of the tangled woods when we'd gotten lost. And yeah, just the amazing people we've worked with, and to have, my Lord, Barry Adamson as your soundtrack man for your debut movie. That's just like, what a mad dream am I living in, you know?
Well, I think it's great that you're acknowledging that, because a lot of people, you know, be like, yes, I did this. And you know, you don't mention any of the people that helped in the process. So
oh God, you know, I mean, and a special shout out also to the graduates of the NFTS school, who, you know, film school, who helped us as well, you know, who were the sound people and the runners and what have you. I mean, you know, really brilliant people who will go on to have hopefully brilliant careers, you know. Yeah, it's just been a real trip. I mean, as I say, we're just a couple of writers and, you know, journalists. We're not filmmakers. I suppose technically we are now, but, you know, we don't come from this world. Even though, you know, I mean, Jane has worked in the film business and distribution, exhibition, and what have you for decades, literally decades. I was at least a film writer for about 20 years. I can never be a film critic again after this experience. Like, I'm cured of that. Cured of criticism. Never again. I absolutely swear I mean that. Never doing that again, because, you know, there seems a bit of an empathy lack or an empathy gap when you're a critic, and to have experienced the other side, I'm like, I feel deeply ashamed of some of the things I used to write when I was dissing other people's movies. So it's just like, no, never again. So you know, that's cured me of that. So good. But yeah, this has been quite an experience.
No, I think it's important a lot of times that new voices, you know, step into the scene.
Old voices in our case, yeah.
Yeah.
You
Well, let's say wise voices. You know what I mean?
Seasoned voices. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'll take that.
Because, you know, would a seasoned documentary maker have done it how you've done it? Right?
Probably not. Oh, that's a really good. You know what? That's a really, really good question. Probably not, because I mean, we have the kind of we have the sort of enthusiasm of the amateurs, you know, of debutante filmmakers, and also, you know, again, we have that kind of kitchen sink attitude, which is we may never get another chance. I mean, it's so difficult to get funding, to get distribution, to make the thing in the first place. So there's really an attitude of, let's just throw everything at the screen now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it could have been a very, very different documentary, particularly if they focused on the management side. I think the film would have been a lot narrower. I think by concentrating on the audience and the audience experience and how it influenced, as we say in the incredibly and feasibly long title, a whole generation of weirdos and misfits. You know, you really enlarge the picture out. You know, it's not really about, weirdly, I mean, the film isn't really about cinema at all. It's about you. It's about the audience. You know, it's about us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's about the experience of being young and discovering things, and about love, and about how you're falling in love with culture. And I think that's really, really important, massively important to show and portray.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. Let people know how they can follow you, right? Because I know I can't wait to see, you know, the blossoming of this project. So how can people follow you and keep track?
Oh, okay. So we're on the inevitable Instagram at Scala Cinema or Scala Club Cinema. I can never remember which. It's one of the two. You'll find us, I promise you. And we have a Twitter account, Scala Club Cinema on Twitter as well. Or is it Scala Cinema? I'm so sorry. My mind's gone blank.
I think it's Scala Cinema, but the links
You're
will be
probably
on
right.
the website. So people go to the website,
totally, yeah.
and you can get the links and go follow them. Go see
Please
the
do.
documentary. go see the documentary because it's
That's
great.
Thank you, man. I mean, that's probably the most important thing right now. But also, if you want to know more of the story, please buy Jane's incredible book, which Mark Commode calls not so much a coffee table book as a coffee table. It is a gigantic thing. If you drop it on your foot, you will be in A&E for a week. And it's a beautiful document. It's bejeweled, beautiful doc. It's every single Scala program from 1978 to 1993, packed in this extraordinary, history. And Jane has written the history of the Scala at the beginning of the book, and then the programs take over. It's the one I edited, the book I edited, which is again a huge editing job to do in about a month that I had to do it because we had to get it out quite quickly.
Man.
Yeah, thank you. But it's just finished its print run, but we've got in touch with a distribution company who are going to underwrite some new copies of it, so it should be out there again. It's a work of art. It's absolutely stunning. So that will fill in the gaps for those who aren't still getting their fix of the Scala enough from our documentary. But yeah, there is so much more of that story to tell, and as I say, I really hope that we get this oral history off the ground, because that will fill even more polyfiller in the Scala story, and it is worth hearing and reading and seeing.
Yes, and as a TV series, I kind of feel it would work a little bit like the IT Crowd.
That's exactly. Funny enough, that's what Jane says. Actually, she thought of it as the kind of IT Crowd. I mean, it's a weird one, We had so many discussions about what it was going to be and how we're going to write it, and I think because we were slightly unsure of what it was going to be really, and there were so many influences coming in that it was a bit of a mishmash between a very, very surreal, hyper real kind of young onesy kind of approach to a sitcom. Then you had the kind of more IT Crowd kind of notes about it. And then you had the kind of officey kind of style about it in a kind of, verite doc, sort of fly on the wall kind of doc. I still don't know, but I still think it's got legs. Genuinely, I think.
Yeah.
But also, there is an argument for saying we should make a straight Scala story, because the story in itself is more insane than anything you could possibly dream of. The actual real story.
Like,
although
oh my God, something famous. That
Almost Famous.
Yes,
No.
yes, Almost Famous.
Right, yeah. But I thought, having said that as well, we might be beset by lots and lots of lawsuits.
True. But you would start off at the beginning and be like, this is maybe based on a true story. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? It may
so
happen,
yeah.
may not have happened.
Exactly. So funnily enough, bringing it back to something like 24-hour Party People might actually be the way forward. As in, kind of, this is a mashup of myth and reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Throw in some outlandish stuff in there, so you'd be like, that obviously never happened. So then people would just be like, was that true? Did that do?
Yeah. And there's a further argument for saying that this film is Jane and I's only film, that it should be one and done, because I don't think we'll ever reach these kind of heady heights again, quite honestly. I think people who make more than one film are kind of literal superheroes. I think they should wear capes. I think that the stamina involved in making more than one film must be off the chain. So maybe this should be it. This should be our one-hit wonder. And then we should go back to writing books and stuff like that. But who knows? It's going to be a very interesting year, I think, and I'm looking forward to whatever it brings.
Oh, well, 2024 is definitely going to be huge for you, my friend. And if it's only one film, I'm glad it was this. But to be honest, I'd like to see other stuff. So, but hey, I'm going to be avidly watching. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been so great. It really has been one of the most enlightening and enjoyable podcasts we've done so far. It's been so good.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I hope the rest of your day goes swimmingly, and
You
yeah,
too.
all of these things happen, because I'm just so looking forward to seeing it all, and definitely checking out the Blu-ray. I'm hopefully my Blu-ray player, I will get it fixed before this goes out, and so then I put out my views on the audio description and all of that aspect of it as well.
They should have done a bang up job. I mean, from what we can see, it's the BFI have really come through for us. Yeah, I mean, they've just done amazing stuff for us every which way, up to and including, arranging this entire season throughout January around our movie. It's just mind blowing. I mean, it's like they couldn't have gone better. I mean, it's just like a bizarre dream come true. To go, we are absolutely the exemplar of the little engine that could. That no one wants to pick us up when we were first touting this round, and then we got picked up at the end of the day by the highest film authority in the land. It's just like, wow. It's also going to be on Channel 4, so Film 4, in December.
Right.
We showed a test screening to the BFI, and they snapped it up on the basis of a single test screening, which is kind of miraculous. And then a week later, we dragged it along to Channel 4, and they snapped it up on the basis of that single test screening. I think it helped having Edgar Wright in the audience laughing like a hyena at it. I think that pushed it over the line. But there's there's a weird irony in the fact that Channel 4 bought out the original Scala building, the original Scala Cinema, in 1981, which is why it had to move to King's Cross. And also the fact that Film 4's sort of programming legacy, if you like, was very much influenced by the Scala. And now we've kind of come full circle. And Film 4 snapped us up, and we're going to be showing on Film 4 at the end of the year. So yeah, that feels like magic in the best kind of poetic sense,
Oh, Matt, what a way to start and end the year. That's incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely.
Oh, tremendous, man. Man, that's great.
And what's happening with you? What's happening with you right now? What's in the future? Are you doing more podcasts, or what else are you doing? What else are you up to?
Yeah, it's just the podcast is just growing, so it's just doing more of this, having more conversations, which is great.
Oh, brilliant.
I don't know. Sometimes you talk to people and things look like they're happening, but then they don't. But
Yeah.
there's things that might be going down, so I'm just pushing it. But it's just just growing this, man, just making it,
That's
bigger.
brilliant. What are you most looking forward to this year?
I don't know. Like, there's just a lot, really. I think once I get this exactly where I want it to be, and I start really pushing it out there, that will be great. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Then there's some big films I'm looking forward to checking out, film festivals, which are always great. And it's just that, and then just organizing a wedding. So there's a lot.
Wow.
There's a lot.
Whose wedding? Is this your wedding or somebody?
Yeah. So
this is your own wedding.
Yeah.
Oh man, congratulations.
Thanks, man.
When is this?
It all depends on work. Yeah, work has been a bit elusive.
Don't take your laptop to the wedding, whatever you do. So just a second. Let's start tapping away. Yeah, I do. Yeah, just tap.
But no, it's work's been a bit elusive. So as soon as I can lock down something, then we can start locking dates in and everything. So it might, if I can get something sorted soon, it could be the end of this year. Otherwise, I think it might be the end of 2025.
That's brilliant.
We will see.
I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, looking forward to it. Oh dear, man. And yeah, and is there any other projects that are on the back?
Yeah, I've I'm supposed to be writing a memoir,
Ah,
because I had a very, very bizarre childhood or upbringing. Um, I was raised in a very dirt poor area of Chelsea called World's End, um, in southwest London,
mm.
below the poverty line, by in a very boho setup, by a radical feminist and a warlock.
Oh, that.
Um, yeah, so that was there's not really been a kind of childhood memoir which has been from the position of someone who was raised essentially by a practicing Crowleyite, a practicing
Mm.
warlock, which is a bit odd. And it's about how I kind of survived that, I guess, is the only word I can use really. And how at the end of the book, the memoir, Jane, who I was making the film with, during the filmmaking process, actually found my biological family. Like, yeah, like 3 years ago. So it has a happy ending, I think, at this point. So yeah, that's all been a bit weird. So yeah, I should really I need to get back to that because I've kept my agent waiting for about 5 years. I mean, I'm a procrastinator, but I procrastinated enough to just make a feature film instead of doing this thing. So I've really, in a spare moment, I have really, really got to get back to that somehow. And I'm glad I did this film before I did it, because it's like if I'd have been like a complete stranger out of nowhere with this memoir, which a very wild and outlandish memoir, people would have gone, they would have gone like, who the hell is this? But who is this nutter, frankly? But the fact that I've kind of done this, they can, oh, it's just Ali. It's all right. It's fine. He made that mad Scala film. It's all right. It's okay. We're safe. That again. That's kind of my reasoning,
Ah,
So yeah. It's the moment. It's hopefully when I get another spare moment out of this, it's editing that oral history, and then finally getting back to that memoir. Yeah.
yeah. So the oral history and then your history. Okay.
Yeah. You can
Man.
actually read a little bit about my history in this month's edition of 14 Times, the magazine dedicated to the occult and woo-woo and ghosts and, the supernatural and things like that, in which I actually, Jane and I wrote about the kind of occult links of the Scala, if you like, or the area it comes across, and about half of it is taken up with my own my own bizarre story. So that there's a taster menu for you, Ali's mad life. And it's really sort of kick up the arse for me to actually sort of encourage me to go back and write the memoir again, because it's quite exposing for the first time to kind of write that story in print and have it literally on the news shelves. But yeah, it's something I need to get back to big time.
Oh man. Well, I cannot wait to check that out for sure.
It's a crazy story. I mean, I'm half Iraqi, I'm half Kiwi and half Iraqi. And Jane mischievously seated my biological father, this elderly Arab guy, next to me during our Scala premiere at the Prince Charles, so he could. So there's a scene from Thundercrack in the film which gave us our 18th certificate. The likes of Edgar Wright and Ben Wheatley do toil quite hard to get an 18th certificate, and they study the BBFC's guidelines and things to try and do this. We got an 18th certificate using 1 single second of Thundercrack. And so Jane was like, yeah, let's sit Ali next to his biological father watching the Scala film, and let's just see his reaction when a Thundercrack comes. I'm like, can you imagine? I only met him like 2 or 3 times, and I'm just you know, this is a porn film, right? And I'm just sitting there next to him, and the moment's coming, and I can feel Jane like almost tittering in the dark behind me, and I'm just like squirming in my seat, like, oh man. And this guy next to me is just like, to his credit, he's like, okay, my biological son has just shown me this. I've only known him like, you know, a year, but yeah, that was quite a moment. Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that'll go in the memoir. Why not?
Yeah, that's private.
Mm.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, like to see something like that, you know, with your actual, you know, if you're you know, sort of grown up as a kid, you know, when you'd see things like that on television, when your parents were in the room, you'd be like leaving the room and blushing.
Yeah.
But to literally sort of sit there in the room with your actual biological father, who you've only known for like 5 minutes, and sort of seeing that that's a yeah. That was a memorable day.
I can only imagine. Oh my gosh. Oh,
Yeah,
man. Ali, this has been great, man. This has been great.
it has. It's been lovely. Thank you so much for this.
Hey, no worries at all. I hope the rest of your day is just as fun.
Thank you, and you.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. You take it
No
easy.
problem. You too, and congratulations again, and have a lovely day on your wedding.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. All right. Hopefully we will
Cheers, man.
speak again soon.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye.